Today I'm bringing you the second part of my Sacred 2 Beginner's Guide. It will cover the rune and cooldown system, plus the most important stuff about your attributes and skills. If you haven't watched the first part, I highly recommend to start there and then come back to this one. So let's start with runes. A crucial aspect of the game to understand is the role of runes and how they influence combat arts. If you want to unlock any combat art, beyond the initial one you get upon character creation, then you need to use runes. Runes not only make a combat art usable, but also enhance its stats, if you use several of them for the same combat art. You can find runes as regular drops from enemies, and then use them directly, or exchange them at the Rune Master for the ones you need. The exchange rate for runes is usually very expensive. Luckily, you can alter the cost in your game files. I also made a video how to do that, so check it out. The maximum number of runes you can read into one combat art is 255. But this does not directly translate to the combat art level. They are two different things, so keep that in mind. You can further increase the combat art level even after you have read 255 runes into them, with stats that directly increase the combat art level, or the plus all combat arts one. Let's now talk about the problem that occurs once we start reading a lot of runes. We have established that it's one of the main ways to increase your damage output. But the downside is that the more runes you read, the higher your regeneration time gets, which is just another word for your cooldown in this game. The key is to find the balance between the number of runes read, the damage or stat increase of your combat arts, and the increase in regeneration time. Typically, short cooldown combat arts can be increased to 100 to 150 runes read once you hit endgame, while long cooldown combat arts and temporary buffs can often be maxed out at 255 runes. That's because they come with a base cooldown and only get the regeneration time as a bonus, which means, for example, maxing out a temporary buff will extend their duration significantly, allowing them to remain active almost continuously, while also giving us an insane stat increase without any detrimental side effects. Similarly, long cooldown skills, like those for the Temple Guardian, can stay active for as long or nearly as long as their cooldown, making it worthwhile to max them out. With buffs it can be tricky, because they can significantly increase your cooldown time once activated. The amount of runes you can read into your buff will of course depend on your build and items, and if you are only using one buff or several. Stats like reduced regeneration penalty from buffs need of course be taken into consideration. Another important factor is the regeneration penalty influenced by the armor lore skill, which is why armor lore is one of the most commonly used skills in any build. It gives you a huge amount of armor bonus, reduces your regeneration time, and can even completely alleviate the speed penalty you can get from high level armor. The bar that reads 100% in the picture besides your equipment represents how much the currently equipped armor increases the cooldown of your combat arts. Other important stats related to cooldown include the chance to halve regeneration time, minus regeneration time, or the reduced regeneration time for a specific aspect. But the most crucial stat is the regeneration per hit. Any hit with your weapon or weapon-based combat arts will decrease the cooldown of your combat arts by that amount, and this effect stacks. So equipping multiple items with this stat can drastically reduce combat art cooldowns, allowing for more runes to be read and resulting in higher damage output. This stat is also why I focus on attack value, even in a spell-based build, as it allows me to constantly hit with my basic attacks or weapon-based combat arts, and with that refresh the cooldowns of my main spells. You should take full advantage of these regeneration tips, especially the last one I mentioned, as they will significantly enhance your damage output and survivability. And don't hesitate to read many runes. If you are playing on PC, you can easily download a character editor that allows you to increase or decrease the number of runes read. Also changing skills and modify other aspects not available in the game, such as changing your combat art skill nodes or change your attribute point distribution. The final crucial step to optimizing and understanding cooldown reduction is the Expert Touch option, available during character creation. Introduced in the Ice and Blood expansion, this option changes how cooldowns work. If Expert Touch is disabled, each of your aspects has its own cooldown, meaning that using a combat art from one category will put all other combat arts from that category on a short cooldown, but other aspects remain unaffected and can be used immediately. If Expert Touch is enabled, using a combat art will not only cause its own aspect, but all other ones to go on a cooldown, but a much shorter one, and your overall cooldown reduction for every combat art is significantly improved. In my opinion, you should always play with Expert Touch enabled. The substantial cooldown reduction is almost always worth the brief cooldown increase for other aspects. Additionally, if you have the regeneration per hit stat on any of your items, the cooldown penalty becomes nearly irrelevant. Now that you are familiar with attack and defense values, spell resistance and so on, let me go over the attributes. Strength increases the attack value and the base damage for strength-based close combat weapons. It does not affect dexterity-based weapons, such as daggers, ranged weapons, short swords, polearms, or intelligence-based weapons like magic staffs. Dexterity slightly increases the attack value and significantly increases the defensive value, acting as the counterpart to strength. It increases the damage dealt by dexterity-based weapons such as short swords, daggers, polearms, and ranged weapons. Stamina reduces the general regeneration time of combat arts, and though not mentioned in the game, it also decreases the regeneration penalty from buffs. Intelligence increases the chance that a spell hits the target with full force by boosting the spell intensity. It also increases the damage dealt by magic staffs and spell damage based combat arts, plus it also raises the critical hit chance for them. Vitality increases the overall hit points and the hit point regeneration rate. Lastly, we have willpower. It increases the resistance against spell damage and their secondary damage effects like burn, poison, freeze or weaken. But it also increases the energy shield hit points and the damage of lightsabers, making it a great choice for the Seraphim and the Temple Guardian, as those two classes utilize an energy shield. It is important to note that investing heavily in only one attribute has diminishing returns, meaning the more points invested, the smaller the benefit. Therefore, it is most effective to allocate points between 2 or 3 attributes, depending on your build and playstyle. As a general rule, first allocate points into strength, dexterity, or intelligence, based on your weapon focus. Then second, most if not all classes should invest into vitality for increased health. And third, consider willpower or stamina, if it's beneficial for your build. However, with stats like regeneration per hit, you can overcome many cooldown reduction issues. So you might need to experiment to see if stamina is worthwhile. If it's not, use the character editor to reassign the attribute points elsewhere. There is also a hidden mechanic called the survival bonus. This bonus increases based on how long your character has been in combat since the last resurrection, resetting to 0 upon death. A higher survival bonus increases your chances of finding rare items and boosts your attribute points, maxing out at 33.33%. The survival bonus also increases enemy levels, leading to better loot with higher base stats. If you are seeking for the best possible loot, such as level 230 or higher items, you need to raise your survival bonus, fight higher level enemies, and obtain their loot. Let's discuss how skills work now, and how to choose the right ones for your build. Each class has 3 aspects, and for each aspect there is a focus skill that significantly reduces the regeneration time of its combat arts. Spell-based aspects also have a lore skill that increases their damage, crit chance, and execution speed of their combat arts. Weapon-based aspects, such as the Devout Guardian for the Temple Guardian, or the Death Warrior and Malevolent Champion aspects of the Shadow Warrior, only have a focus skill. Weapon-based aspects use tactics lore instead of a dedicated lore skill of their aspects. Putting points into it grants you modifier points for all weapon-based aspects. Once the green bar is full, you will unlock your next point, and the same of course applies to any other aspect-related skill. To choose the modifier points, just press on the arrow on the right side. The rest of the skills function mostly as described. They are just increasing their respective stats, and with 75 points invested, you will master the skill, which is almost always worthwhile. However, note that the higher the skill level, the smaller the return on stat increases. You should also note that you have to put actually 75 points into a skill. Even if you increase the skill level much higher than 75 points, with the help of items like this, you still won't master them. And neither will you unlock the modifier points for your aspects. So that's it for today. With this knowledge, you should have a much easier time to get into endgame, understanding other builds, and start creating your own. Don't forget, if you got something out of it, then hit the like button and subscribe for more content like this.